So welcome. It's a new year, and it's a great time to think about what is the plan for learning with your family, your client, uh, your family office. So however you're approaching this, wherever you are sitting in that advisor chair, that is our focus today. We're going to actually use the framework of our Tamara Learning platform to actually show the content today. So I'm logged in. If you haven't seen how our content is set up, take some time later to try a free demo or a live demo with us, or a recorded demo if you don't have time. So we're going to just jump right here into the advisor webinar. And this is our outline for today. I'm going to share a little bit more about the goals of the webinar, take a couple polls. Then we're going to jump in and talk more about education for adult learners. Again, our view is that a lot of the rubber meets the road when rising gen beneficiaries, members of complex families start to age into adulthood, so 18 plus. There's a great amount of financial parenting content that can happen before then, but that's our focus for today. So we're going to talk about what are the motivators, intrinsic, extrinsic, it's hard to say that. And then some of the practical knowledge areas that are helpful for adult learners to master. Then we're going to give you the tips and the tools. That's why you're here. That's why you're interested. These are all free, accessible. And so we'll go through several of those to prompt you with ideas of what you can use to get started, get going, or enhance what you're already doing. We don't make any assumptions. Probably some of you are far better advisors at education than we are. So we also want to learn from you. And we'll wrap it up with a couple more polls and answering some frequently asked questions. Okay. Are we ready, Tori?
I'm ready.
Okay, I'm ready. All right, so let's talk about goals. We are really excited to map out kind of the different kinds of learners. What should we be thinking about how family or learners want to go through it by themselves? Are they doing it with a peer group, with a sibling group, cousin group, a mixed group, right? We have sometimes families who want to have a mixed group of learners from different families participate. Sometimes it's, with an advisor. So we'll talk more about that. Inspire learning by understanding the pros and cons of carrots and sticks. Listen, we need to get clear. There are real differences with carrots and sticks when it comes to incentivizing learning. And we have to be very clear about the cultural considerations of what's going to work best. So we're going to give you some thoughts and ideas on that front as well. And next, we are going to give you the tools. So these are some things that we've developed over the years. We use them already with our clients. They're pretty effective. And we think they could be helpful if you guys want to use them as well. All right. Now, let's do a quick poll. Tori, can you help me out here? What are some of the hurdles to lasting education? Okay, we're launching this poll. Please check it out, see what you think.
I am going to publish our results here. And so we had 21 people say learner interest and engagement. Building curriculum was 5. Facilitating curriculum, 5 people had difficulty with time of commitment, and then other.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate understanding where you're struggling. And for those of you who said learner interest and engagement, I think that is the elephant in the room in so many families. And why? Because oftentimes the learners don't even know they should be interested. Like, they don't understand the consequences of being unprepared. So sometimes to get interest, and we'll talk about this in a bit, we have to understand more about motivators and what gets people off the couch, what gets people curious. So we'll give you some more tips and ideas on that front. I also want to just speak to time commitment, because this is a big one. This is probably the greatest resource constraint, where people actually don't feel like they have enough time, right? If you're spending time in your family meeting, or you're spending time at your family retreat, or you, the advisor, have to carve out additional time to mentor one by one by one by one by one, that's really hard to think about where you're going to find enough time to actually accomplish maybe all the learning that needs to happen. And oh gosh, if you have to have multiple curriculum that address learning at different pace, age, where people are at, this gets completely overwhelming. So these hurdles are real, and they are truly one of the impediments that kind of stifle families and advisors from getting very far down the learning path. I will also say building and facilitating kind of go hand in hand, because oftentimes we don't know what to build to lead in person versus what to outsource versus what's really activities in education that's good to do as a group versus to do individually or self-study. So we hope we can tackle that. Those who responded other, is there anything in the chat that came up, Tori, that you want to call out?
Someone just said different stages of development needed in a cohort. And so I believe you touched on that, and we'll loop that in as well.
Fantastic. All right. Wow, let's get into it. Learning types. And we just provided 3 that we think a lot about. There's the self-paced learner who's kind of building and pulling content as they need it. We obviously have content that we've developed that can be used self-paced and asynchronously. But then there's oftentimes learners who say, I'm just going to learn on my own, read books. I'm going to, talk to people. I might do an internship. So self-paced learning is really good if you have a highly engaged and dedicated, self-driven kind of individual. When I see learner commitment and questions about learner engagement, I'm guessing that some of you say, oh, this is not my client. This isn't what I'm dealing with. Now, cohort learning is something we see a lot at conferences, institutional meetings. So we'll see group learning oftentimes happening. Where we use group learning is we actually have the ability to custom build cohorts, and they can be, all the same types of clients. They can be different clients. So, there's all different kinds of ways to, sort of engage learning and to make it sort of involved. I would also say that cohort learning can be guided. So, you can think about pulling together a group in our system and actually be leading that group through the learning. So it's a combination of sort of guided and self-paced, but it also allows you to be an active participant and say prompting, conversations or encouragement or calling out interesting things that somebody might have posted in a discussion board. I would also say the nature of how people learn is important to consider. So, again, back to self-paced, we have families and individuals who sprint. They are lightning speed at click, 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 and going through a lot of content. The way we make sure that they're getting stuff out of it is because we have learning checks. And I think that's one thing that you should all be thinking about in terms of delivering education, that you make sure that you're finding ways to ensure that people actually are taking in what you're providing. And that is actually one of the hardest things about in-person group learning and actual mentoring. So again, if you can find ways to make sure that the sprinter doesn't speed through everything. Likewise, the thing that's also nice about asynchronous learning is that no one's looking over your shoulder if you take 2 hours or 2 minutes to cover different content. So sometimes self-paced in this new millennial kind of Gen Z environment is preferred because they like to be able to go back to things, or they like to reiterate things. Let's get into carrots and sticks. This is a very big hot button in families, and an advisor are oftentimes in the middle, where maybe they're not really authorized to give a carrot, or maybe they're trying to carry out a stick that has been imposed by, say, a family office or a family leadership group that said this is the expectation. I want to give you some ideas or some thoughts about the pros and the cons, because in some ways they both have merit, but they also both have shortcomings. So, if we're mandating through sticks, that's a fear-based approach to galvanizing learning, and it oftentimes doesn't. It's not permanent. It's temporal, and it oftentimes might create behavior modifications where people will lean in and start doing things. However, it can also create a lot of resentment. It can create an environment of distrust. It can have negative impacts on relationships. Gosh, he's better at this or she's better at this, and she got there first, and that's not fair because wasn't ever set up for success like this. So it can create these outgroups. And I think this is really important to consider. What are you trying to build and to what end? And if negative reinforcement is your go-to, then know that it may not be permanent. It might be short-term, but I sort of lean more towards the appreciative. And although carrots are great too, I think it's important to understand, do you have enough interest and lean in to support learning as a value within the family? So the cons of having carrots are manifold. One, what do you reward? I mean, what is the reward for learning? Shouldn't it just be learning itself? So if you're giving away iPads and Amazon gift cards or opportunities to go to great exotic places, a cruise, use the private NextGen card or whatever, you might be confusing values and valuables and incenting material things with education. So I just caution you too, on the carrot side of thing, that, again, carrots can get lumpy and not always equal. And again, ping me in the chat if you have any thoughts about that. But I'm a big believer that you have to sort of operate within the norms of the family to work with what will work. And there are, let's be honest, a lot of top-down families who will just say, mandate, this is part of who we are and what we do, and this is why you should be doing it. It's not even a carrot or a stick. It's just, this is a requirement. So, we do see sometimes people tie it to, well, listen, if you want to be able to have opportunities to advance in the family governance, to be considered for a junior board or a committee position, or to even be on an observer board role, that can also be a constructive way, because you're at least providing opportunities to ascend and excel. And so that would be another possibility I would suggest.
So Kirby, before we move on, I actually wanted to quickly, could you give an example of a carrot and a stick in a learning environment that our advisors might see?
Yeah, so the sticks are easy. Sticks are, if you don't do this, you won't get this. So if you don't complete that internship, you won't be considered for a junior board role. So usually the sticks are like, you will miss out on something. You won't be invited to the family meeting if you haven't completed the education for the board role. So those are usually the sticks that I see. The carrots can be a number of things, right? You won't get to participate in the fun days of the family vacation if you haven't completed. So you'll get the fun days. The carrot is you'll get the fun days if you complete all this education in advance. Or, we are creating a family competition among family members. Whoever completes it the quickest and with the best score will get X. And that, again, it could be material, it could be an opportunity. So that's an example of a carrot. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, so engaging and advising learners. So let's just talk about some of the intrinsic motivators. And if you're not familiar with the what's in it for me principle, that's WIFM principle, this is kind of at the heart. If you don't take anything away from this webinar, just come back to this, because this is number one. It actually pertains to all of our lives as well. We are motivated by things that impact us and help us get where we want to go. So adult learners really have to identify what you're presenting to them for education as being relevant, important. Does it help me do something better in my life? Does it solve a problem? And they also are not interested always to get a master level, dissertation level download. So is it digestible? Can I access it from where I'm at? So we, as advisors, consider that we might be operating here in our technical capacities day in and day out, but when we're working with a learner, we have to think about where they're at and what did they need. And I just caution advisors because sometimes we want so bad for our learners to learn. We want so bad for our clients to get that education, but we can't do it for them. So we have to show for them how it's going to help them, what's going to motivate them to want to lean and do the work. Otherwise, we're fooling ourselves. There's a good chance they won't proceed. Okay, so again, here's your first resource. Write it down. We just recently released an article in Family Business Magazine, how to create a NextGen wealth education plan. Again, this is a helpful start-up kind of article, but again, this is a resource that you can share with the family. This is something you can present with, an existing client or to your peers to say, hey, how do we get learning going? And this provides some tips and tools about how to get purposeful around education. And when we think about family learning and education, we're talking about the foundational core of topics that a young adult would need to know to be a good, responsible, beneficial owner. So do they have a strong base knowledge of stewardship, beneficiary fundamentals, what it means to be a trustee? So that's sort of our entree, that light turquoise pie shapes at the bottom of the circle wheel. And then to the right, estate planning, trust, and tax are pretty much more of our core technical areas from a planning standpoint. Again, this is geared for the US. If you're connected to families in Canada, we also have a Canadian curriculum. But these core areas will start to reinforce the reason we plan. What does it mean to have an estate plan? And what is a trust? And how does it operate? So we actually get fairly technical, but we have a progressive curriculum that moves from an introduction sort of type course and module into more advanced modules in each of those technical areas. Finally, the trust administration, working with advisors, investment fundamentals, and personal finance is sort of our last, course program. And that, again, covers those more technical areas, like how do you read a financial statement? How do you read an investment statement? So very practical types of rewarding things that we can say, oh, this is so great. I didn't get a master's in finance or an undergrad in investing, so I don't really know these areas, but this can give the layperson access to build that financial fluency. And that's all of these courses in this wheel are what we call our accredited beneficiary stewardship program. Again, you can learn a lot more about these 10 different courses in that broader program. But this is a great place to start if you're thinking about the new year and thinking about building a plan for your clients. Okay, I'm now actually going to jump into the tips and tools. I know we just have about 20 minutes left, but listen, values is something that many families sort of anchor their purposefulness to. And using family values and understanding the culture will give you many guideposts to how to think about learning and engagement. And even if you've had maybe some hiccups or some bumps in the road, I think there's some ways that we can lean in and talk about ways to, start engaging. By the way, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about some different opportunities to explore values and vision and education plans. There are other tools beyond Tamron Learning, certainly. I know Dennis Jaffe has joined our attendee list, and he's got an incredible deck. If you haven't checked out his cards, there's just a lot of great resources out there. So again, we approach learning in a mixed modality. And one of the things that we've promote within Tamron Learning is there is a basic worksheet um, around, excuse me, core values that can be really helpful to start with in terms of thinking about getting actionable. And so Betsy Fort Lewis recently did a podcast with us from Inner Will, and she actually shared some cool tools and ideas about just how to get started. This is not as deep an exercise as, say, Dennis's values cards, but it's a good starting place, right? When we start to connect what we value, and if learning becomes something we really appreciate, then it's easier to create purposefulness and buy-in. Um, Other things, let's talk about urgency, because that's probably one of the killers of every great learning plan is that people don't feel that it's urgent. So we developed this wealth workbook. It's free, it's accessible, and this is another great tool. I'm just going to bring you so you can see we got a lot of exercises here. I'm not going to go through all of these today, but I want to talk about this, what keeps me awake at night. This is something I have talked to clients about for many, many, many decades now. And we have this kind of cool worksheet that can help identify where wealth fits into it. What's the issue? What's the thing that's stressing us out? What are we trying to get over? What's the hurdle? Who can help? And that might be you. It also might be a technical advisor. It might be an education program. Who knows? And then what is it that the learner or the beneficiary is trying to achieve? What's the preferred outcome? And then let's put some urgency. Let's talk about a timeline. We need to be more accountable, right? This is a big issue with a lot of learning efforts because we don't actually put timeframes around what we're trying to get to. And guess what? If we need to extend them sometimes, that's okay. So we have different kinds of things that you can map out with your wealth. Perhaps it's with your career, and personal development. Maybe it's, I want to get healthier in the new year. So again, this is a really cool tool that I would just bring to your attention that can help you bring urgency by connecting it to meaningful things that your learner needs, right? What they're trying to accomplish. This is going to help them understand why this will help them accomplish that goal. And that's really, really important. Okay, more assessments. I'm just going to load you up with the tools and I'm going to give you some ideas for different tips. We love our assessments. There's some great tools out there. I'm going to just tell you, this is just one avenue, but there's many, many different consultants and advisors and firms who have different tools. We have built an online tool that you can actually go through with your client. It will generate a report and kick it back to you or the learner, and you can go in step by step. I'm not going to spend the time today to walk through this, but this is a cool tool. And then we also, this is another fantastic tool, develop this assessment, which when we think about where are our learners starting, sometimes we don't really know. And we want to know more about what their actual knowledge is around technical areas and software issues. So this is a pretty cool tool that we've developed that you can go through with your client or the adult family members and say, hey, let's just talk about all these different sort of subtopics to what it means to be a beneficiary or what it means to be a trustee. And then you might find things that don't really apply, and that's okay too, because you can say, hey, you don't have a private trust company, but maybe you would want to know about this. This might be something your family does down the road, or maybe this will help you understand what a private trust company is versus a commercial trust company. So again, there's a lot in this assessment that will give you the ability to pinpoint where is your learner starting? What do they feel like they know? And how can you help them? How can you demonstrate to them, hey, we can close the gap on this. This is totally, we can manage this. Okay, other ways. I told you I'm loading you up with tips and tools. I'm just a shout out to Joe Riley because he is championing on the Legacy of Inherited Wealth, this project that is one of the greatest. The Inheritance Project, if you're not familiar, is fantastic. And we would suggest, think about using this book as a launching pad to inspire stories. We have a podcast with Joe Riley. You can listen to it through our podcast library and think about how going through a book like this, or even pulling out a few of the stories. And by the way, with permission from the Inheritance Project, we have the full book embedded within our learning program. You can go through and pick out some of these different chapters or thoughts and use this as a launch pad to say, hey, where are you? What's important to you? How do you derive meaning from what you're inheriting? What do you feel like you're empowered to know or you don't know? So again, there's a lot of different ways to leverage other great content out there that can bring a tremendous resource to your client. Okay, so building rapport. Charlotte Beyer is the legend. We all know and love and respect her. She has provided so much attention to learning for decades in our space. So we were so lucky to do a podcast with Charlotte, and she took us through, this is called her CEO Wealth Workbook. I love this tool. It is one of the most enlightening tools I think you can use if you're an advisor, and particularly if you're starting to break the ice about relationships and what the relationship as an advisor to the client. This provides you ways to explore how you would describe the purposefulness of the wealth in the learner's eyes. It can open up conversations about pet peeves. Now, listen, this might mean they examine you under a microscope in a different way, but this is a great way to start to understand where they're coming from. I hate when he's late. She always talks so much through the meeting. I feel like they're disorganized. These are just some of the pet peeves that might come up that will also help your practice. Vulnerabilities. Clients oftentimes feel very vulnerable in different areas. And this is a great way to start to understand where they don't feel so sure. So again, I won't go through all of My Money Myself, this workbook that Charlotte gave us permission to use. Her podcast, listen to that at some point, because she actually walks you through the workbook and how to use it. So even more deep dive than we'll cover today on this webinar. And then a shout out for Wealth Management Unwrapped. It's a great tool, great resource if you're starting out education with a client who might not come from a deep financial or technical background. Okay, let's talk about launching education. Over to you, Tori.
Okay, perfect. So we are going to get started with another poll here. And so we're just trying to get a sense of when you are looking to launch education. Some people, it's a really pressing need. We have clients come to us and they say, I'd like my kids to inherit $1 million tomorrow, and I have not talked to them at all about anything. And so that's our sort of like pressing, our easiest client to get education out to. And some people are like, I don't know, I'm just thinking about it, maybe next year, maybe 5 years from now. But it's always a good time as an advisor to start that process, have these conversations, and be able to roll it out. So I'm going to publish the result here. So we have lots of people who are ready. A number of people in the first 6 months of the year here. And then again, new year, great time to start approaching education again, 6 months to 1 year. And then we have a few people who are like, check back next year. We're not ready to have that conversation yet.
That's okay. I want to applaud that, to see that we have like almost 70% of those who did the poll say they're ready now or they want to do it in the next 6 months. That's fantastic. That's super encouraging. And I have to say, for those of you who even have it on the docket for this year, that's almost 20% of you. Hey, you have great aspirations, and now this is a great time to get the tools and the resources to get ready. And we'd love to be a learning partner with you, whatever that looks like. So there's lots of ways to get going. And thankfully, we have some great resources in our field, in our space, and it's evolving like every day. There's more stuff coming out. I know at Tamron Learning, we are our worst enemy because we keep creating new and more and different stuff. Why? Because we actually are so excited about learning and the opportunities that it affords. So as I jump back in, I thought it would be helpful that maybe we just tackle some frequently asked questions. And, you know, if you all have questions that you want to populate in the chat, you know, please go right ahead and send them our way. We can certainly tackle any of the ones that are on your mind. We certainly have FAQs that we are tackling all the time. So let's just see if anyone has any link to Charlotte Byers materials. Well, in fact, Danielle, we have. It's in the podcast library. I'm just going to call it out. And I think, yeah, I think you can get to it right there if you just go to our podcast library page and look for Charlotte's beautiful face. You will see it there, and the wealth workbook is in that as well. Troy, what topics should we bring up? Because we get a lot of questions around education, our learning platform, what learners are struggling with. Where do you think we should go?
So I think it would be interesting to maybe address this different stages of development. So say that you have a family with 10 people in it, you have some cousins, you have some siblings, some people have an MBA, and some people have a high school level of education. How can you cater to a group with mixed education levels?
Yeah, mixed education levels. That is great. So one thing I suggest is coming up with your learning objectives first. Like, what is it? What's the base level? Whether you're a superstar, master's plus plus plus, or maybe you struggled to get your GED. What are the learning objectives, like the minimum standard that you want everyone to know? And then what does that mean by learner? I know that sounds strange, but if I have a learning disability and I struggle with reading, you don't want to set a learning objective like you have to read all these books when that totally impairs that individual from being able to achieve that goal. So can they listen to those texts on, audio books? So think about how the goals relate to individual learners. So I'd highly recommend first coming up with your overarching goals of what success looks like. And then what are the goals connected to different opportunities for advancement? So again, if you're a family that's encouraging leadership roles or operational roles, you need to tailor different learning expectations for those different opportunities. And that might just help people say, yeah, that's me, or you know what, I'm not going to opt in for that quite yet. But we're a big believer that you have to understand what you're trying to achieve and then how to make it realistic for different family members. And then on some levels, personalizing to understand, okay, well, you're going to be better suited. You're a kinesthetic learner going and doing an internship hands-on, right, at the XYZ company. Or you know what, you are a bookworm. So we are going to load you up with lots of different resources. I think one thing we like about what we've created, Tamron Learning, is that we have a really deep list of multisensorial learning. So we appeal to all those learning styles. The auditory learner can learn page by page. The visual learner can see animated GIFs, lots of books, lots of activities for the kinesthetic learner. Okay, let's keep going. What's another question? Clients want this type of education, but aren't willing to pay what it really costs. How do you counter their concerns about how much it will cost? Hey, that's a great question, and costs are something that our consumers sometimes are fickle about, right? We'll pay a multiple six-figure amount for an Ivy education because there's a prestige and a brand associated with it. But sometimes we step back and say, well, what does that allow them to do if they have particularly a very bespoke or niche kind of bachelor's of arts or undergraduate that doesn't prepare them for actually a path? So one way I look at it is saying, let's compare, right? We think our learning programs are actually really competitive, if not more competitive, and you get more out of it, more access, and for longer than many of the in-person learning opportunities. I think it's also important to understand what kind of investment clients are willing to make into education, because unfortunately, about only 2%, right? That was a study recently that you called out, Toria. 2% will invest in education. So we need to right size the reality that if we're willing to invest a lot of money into how our wealth is managed by investment managers, or how we account for it through technology platforms, or how we report on it, why wouldn't we want to make the same investment in the people we're trying to protect it or prepare it for? So I think we have to help rationalize with our clients about the value proposition of, did you work really hard so your inheritor might mismanage it or not even feel competent to own it? Because guess what? Here's the other FYI. a lot of impetus in the next generation is to give it away. And that's great, but we should educate them about what that means and what they need to live on if they give it all away, because we need them to have skills to do other things then to earn it.
And Kirby, I also just want to touch on something that I talk to our learners about is what is the cost of not doing this education, right? That creating that urgency. So when we have advisors who might suggest education and they lean out of it or they're resistant to it, that there's real costs associated with not having your next gens prepared to inherit. And not just financial costs, but also there's some emotional cost there. There's, their personal development and well-being as well. And so I think we can take a step back and say, would you be willing to pay for a seminar so that 5 years from now, when your kids inherit, they don't need lots of emotional work to get through this?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And the more we start earlier socializing that learning is a value or something we do in our family, actually, the easier it is to build on it. And sometimes it's kind of feels disruptive when all of a sudden someone lays down the law and says, okay, now we got to learn. So the more incrementally, right, we just make this part of our cultural norm, the better. That doesn't mean you can't get going. And I think, again, back to carrots and sticks, sometimes the fear, the FOMO, fear of missing out, is a great way to inspire clients to say, it's never too late. Don't miss out. This is such a great opportunity to build rapport, to get clients excited about what the possibility is, and to really bring meaning for themselves to what the wealth that they're inheriting or they're trying to perpetuate. Any last minute FAQs coming in or any questions?
Someone just asked what a reasonable budget or investment would look like, and they did contextualize it and say there's obviously variance in that. But what do we see in the brick and mortar space versus what our education maybe looks like?
Sure. Well, again, I would say at the low end, I would say most advisors are working with families. So let's qualify that we're kind of working in the ultra high net worth or the high net worth space. So I wouldn't recommend necessarily having a huge budget if your client only has, $1 million retirement account. But if they have, in excess of that, and there's aspirations to pass on wealth, that is important, because then we're talking about a stewardship principle by the elders. So anywhere from, call it, 5 to 10,000 for say a household, a smaller household, or possibly more. And again, this all varies because we have family offices who will spend 6 figures on education. And so it really depends on the type of learning, the approach to learning, and the complexity. And so, if you only have a single learner, they might, you might be allocating obviously far less. Or if you're resourcing a lot of the education in-house or through yourself, perhaps it's even less. But if you're looking to outside resources, I think it's fair to budget in that realm for a single household. I hope that helps. Well, we really appreciate your time and attention. Please know that we'll be following on this webinar and sending out more of this content following the webinar. But if you get a chance, just go into the chat, the Q&A section, and you can click on those links to get to a lot of the resources we shared. And we'll be following up with more of those resources and hope to have a conversation with you in the new year for those of you who are interested learning more about Tamron Learning and how we work with families and advisors and family offices. Here's our emails. Please feel free to email us if you want to follow up with anything that we presented today or want to talk more about your specific situation and what you're trying to tackle. And again, for those advisors who say, gosh, I don't know if education is for me, that's okay. Just the key is getting our clients where they need to go from a learning agenda. And there are ways to accomplish that. So we'd love to help you if we can. And thank you so much for attending Tips and Tools to Galvanizing Learning with NextGen clients. Have a great day.